How is it going? I transcribed 10 Stefan Grappelli licks, and this is what I learned. First things first, if you want transcriptions of all of this, plus some helpful PDFs put together to help you use the material that I talk about in this video, then join my Patreon. If you join it from the fundamentals tier upwards, you'll get access to PDFs from this video, plus PDFs from my other videos, plus access to my beginners class course, which is basically a bunch of videos designed to help you as a beginner jazz violinist get your best start. Anyhow, let's get on with the video. Today I transcribed 10 Stefan Grappelli licks, and I learned a couple of little things from it. We're going to go straight in. Number 1. Let's have a little listen to Grappelli playing a bluesy lick over minor swing. So this line is something that you hear Grappelli use all the time. It's a very melodic line, it's a very bluesy line, and it's one that's worth learning. Let's have a listen to line number 2. Grappelli here is playing over a 2-5-1 in G major. Interesting, what Grappelli does here is he plays a sort of bluesy thing over that 2 chord, that A minor 7 chord. And it's like he's treating it like it's the 1 chord. It's a very bluesy sound, very similar to the first line. It feels like he's giving it a sort of A minor bluesy sound for a moment. But then he plays that sort of F natural over the whole thing, which in a lot of ways shouldn't work, but it does because it's a blues note. So a lot of what we're listening to here is Grappelli's sort of bluesy sound. Let's have a little listen to number 3, which is Grappelli playing over the B section of I Got Rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Interestingly here, Grappelli mainly just plays around with a sort of major 9 sound. So he doesn't play the 7th for most of this line. He just goes up this really interesting arpeggio with a 9th on top of it, which gives us a very melodic sound. He mainly focuses around a sort of D major triad here. Very, very melodic, very, very simple, but sounds great because of how he plays it, and sort of sounds great because of how simple it is as well. But he isn't spending loads of time around that flat 7, that C natural note. He's mainly focusing around the sort of D major sound of that D7 chord. Let's have a little listen to lick number 4, and here Grappelli's playing over the Django Reinhardt tune, Djangology. Now this line is a classic Grappelli line. You hear him playing this sort of thing over so many major tunes. It's very much based on the G major scale and some finger patterns that work nicely on the violin, but also it's based very heavily on the open strings. So that open string sound is very important to Grappelli's playing. He does a bunch of little sort of slides down to the open string, and I think that's actually key to getting the sound here. I don't think this line would sound great in A flat or in D flat. It wouldn't make any sense. You need that open A here and the open D to get that Grappelli sound here. Let's look at number 5, and this line is from Grappelli's solo on My Melancholy Baby, from one of those Rome sessions. A couple of the tracks that I've picked here are from the Django and Grappelli Rome sessions because it's my favourite set of recordings. This line is a nice F minor line. It's a good and interesting example of Grappelli playing in a non-violinistic key, E flat major, F minor being the 2 chord here, but it's one of those prolonged 2 chords where it sort of becomes, in a way, a new home. And Grappelli is treating it as such by playing around with the F harmonic minor. It's using that E natural there. Really gives us a sense of us being at home in that key, because using that A natural sort of implies a C7, and that C7 implies that we're sort of now in a temporary home in F minor. And it's really a nice example of Grappelli sounding a little bit more jazz, and it's a really good example of Grappelli, to some degree, I feel like moving with the times, in that It's a little bit later on in his career as a jazz violinist, and he is playing just a little bit more hip. There's a little bit more offbeat stuff. He isn't just sticking with nice bluesy sounds. He's playing things that are a little bit more complicated. He is sort of emphasizing chord sequences just in a slightly different way, a slightly more modern way. And it's actually like I've said, it's my favorite point of Grappelli's career. A lot of people say that about the Rome recordings. Let's have a little listen to line number 6. Now this line is a really nice piece of Grappelli-ism. It's using open string, it's using the open E, which is nice shrill sound, but as well it's also using that octave harmonic, so the harmonic right in the middle of the string, or that middle harmonic, I don't know what we call that in violin education. He's using that open string and that harmonic to sort of create basically an effect. Grappelli's finding things that sort of work really nicely on the instrument and fit under the fingers that have become interesting effects, and as such they become Grappelli-isms. It's not really a line that you're going to hear any other instrumentalist playing. You're not going to hear a piano player playing that line, maybe sometimes, but really this is a violin line, and Grappelli sort of found it, and I think that's a really cool thing to notice. The violin is not really known as the strongest jazz instrument, right? There's not many of us out there, and there's not many examples of people in the jazz era or those early stages of jazz playing the violin. And this is Grappelli sort of making his mark, I'd say, on jazz violin. Let's have a listen to lick number 7. This one is Grappelli playing over I Found a New Baby. This line is going from A7 to D minor, and what Grappelli does is he really just emphasizes the chords, right? He really emphasizes the chord right from the root down to the root, using all the notes from the chord, the 1, the 7, the 5, the 3, and then he jumps up and plays around with the flat 9. So that's so he's sort of playing around with an idea. So he's sort of playing around with the idea of A7 flat 9, which in effect is sort of like playing around with the idea of D harmonic minor. And this is just a classic thing to be able to do, a classic thing to use when we're playing over minor chord sequences. Grappelli was well known for doing it. Grappelli does it very well, and I think he does it really nicely in this line. Let's have a little listen to lick number 8. Now, this one comes from the Django tune Heavy Artillery. Grappelli is playing around with a C blues sound. So he's playing around with the flat 7 of C. In the chord sequence, Django is not playing any chords that use that. He's not playing a C7. He's not playing an A7 flat 9. He's just playing a 1, 5, 1. But I think Grappelli was hearing something else and implying something else. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm overthinking it. It's likely because I've overthought stuff before. But hear me out. This tune is basically a rhythm changes, i.e. it's based quite heavily on the changes of I got rhythm. And with those changes, people mess around with the chords often and do their own versions of it. Now this would be, in my opinion, a sort of very simple version of it, in that most of the time all Django's playing is 1, 6, 2, 5. Now often in a more complicated version of these changes, you would hear 1 dominant, 4, 4 minor, or something similar. You would hear that, but the main thing being that 1 dominant, i.e. C, C7. And right at the moment where you might often hear people playing those changes, Grappelli plays that flat 7. So in my opinion, he might be either expecting that to be what everybody's playing underneath him, or he's just implying it. Anyway, it ends up sounding really, really nice because of it. In a lot of ways, you hear it and you think, well, why is he playing a B flat over a G7 chord? And he's basic. And I'd say it's because he's implying something slightly different. Let's have a little listen to lick number 9. This one's been played over the tune Daphne. Now, in this line, Grappelli is again using the violin to its full advantage. In a lot of ways, this line is a very simple enclosure played over the 5 of the chord, the 1 of the chord, the 5 of the chord, and the 1 of the chord again. Slightly different every time, but it's based on a little bit of, it's sort of based on an enclosure there. However, the main thing is, to me, is that it's using fifths, and it's using open strings, and it's using harmonics to create nice effects over the instrument, and it just works really nicely. It's a very violinistic thing to play. You hear Grappelli play it all the time in major key tunes. He wasn't really thinking about the chord sequence here. He's just thinking, I'm in D, I'm going to play around with the chord of D, and the effect is a nice melody. Let's have a little look at lick number 10, and this is Grappelli playing over the well-known standard Honeysuckle Rose. We're ending on a nice bluesy one here. This is a big old bend starting from, I guess, just under the B flat and going right up to the C. And then it's basically like I said, super bluesy line, ends up jumping up to the 6 and then down to the flat 3. Yeah, and then it ends on a nice major 7. So at this point, I think there is a F major being played underneath, and Grappelli is playing a big E note, and he's really emphasizing that. It's sort of like a rhythm that he would often play on the root note, but he's doing it on the major 7, which creates a little bit of tension. It's just a really interesting effect. I think it also utilizes the violin quite nicely because it's an open E, and it's sort of easy to be nice and in tune there. I wonder if that's why Grappelli landed on that E. Who knows? So those are 10 really interesting Grappelli lines that I learned. And what did I learn from them? I learned a bunch of different things. First of all, I learned that Grappelli is very influenced by blues. He's very influenced by early horn players. What's funny is you often hear people talking about, Django and Grappelli as not really having much blues in their playing, and I just don't understand why people say that, because you listen to Grappelli's bends, you listen to his slides, you listen to his use of those blue notes, i.e. the flat 3s, the flat 7s, and to me he really does, he does really have elements of blues in his playing. Slightly different to the American musicians of that era, but really he does play the blues in his own certain way. Talking of blues, if you want to know what I know about blues and what I know about learning blues and putting that into jazz and how it helps us learn the basics of jazz, then sign up to my Patreon and you will be able to get access to my beginners class, which has a module all about the blues. Okay, and what else did I learn? I learned that Grappelli likes to utilize the instrument for what it's good for. He uses open strings. I think him and Django obviously made sure that they played in keys that made sense for the violin. I can't remember where I saw this, but I was scrolling on my phone. I ended up watching a video about violin and keys, and it made me feel nice, warm inside, because as a jazz violinist, you're often going to be finding yourself in situations with instrumentalists who are used to playing in different keys that aren't violin friendly. And whilst we need to learn to be able to do that, and we need to spend as much time as we can being able to sort of utilize all of the key centers in Western classical music, it's also important to give ourselves a break and realize this really simple piece of advice, or this really simple piece of information. If you look at the history of the violin, and if you look at the history of violin concertos written by the great composers of the time, there is not one violin concerto that is in D flat major. Find me one. Please find me one. I might be wrong, but in general, we're not looking at the great violin concertos being in anything other than simple keys for the violin, because those composers who composed these pieces thought to themselves, now how do I make this instrument and this instrumentalist sound as good as possible? And in effect, how do I make this piece of music as exciting and brilliant as possible? And one of the aspects of that is making sure that the instrumentalist is comfortable and making sure that it is in a comfortable key for the violin. The violin resonates so much better in keys that have a bunch of the open strings in it, because we use those harmonics and those open strings to make sure we are in tune, as well as the fact that the instrument just sounds better because of all those open ringing sounds that we get when we are in tune. It's not just about being in tune. Us being in tune with those open violin-y keys makes the instrument sound better. Anyway, I think Grappelli used this concept in his own improvisations. Just like those great composers utilized the violin in the right way, Grappelli did so too. He created lines and ideas and different effects, all based on what sounded the best on the violin. Those are the two main things that I took away from this. If you've enjoyed this video, please think about signing up to my Patreon. You'll get PDFs with the transcriptions of all of these lines, a little PDF cheat sheet to help you use these lines in your own improvisation, plus literally so much stuff. You get access to all of my beginners courses, you get access to a monthly composed solo by me. It's crazy what you get. Why don't you sign up and try it out? Thanks so much for listening, guys. See you again.